Well, good morning once again. Wow. Whew. I love Sundays. I think I said that at the very beginning. I absolutely love Sundays. I love days like today where we can do baby dedications, where we can hear from someone on the other side of the world, where we can really come and worship through music and all sorts of different ways as we glorify God, hopefully, in all that we do. One of the ways that we do that also is through a message. And so we open up our Bibles every Sunday. And if you're new here with us for the very first time this morning, we are starting a new series, so you joined us on the right day. But our hope is that every Sunday we open up God's Word to see what it has to say to us, to challenge ourselves, not just on Sunday, but every day of the week to say, okay, God, what is it that you have for me? Where are you challenging me? How am I finding new life through you? And helping others find the same thing. And so as we start this new series, we're coming out of a series that we just did on spiritual gifts. And last Sunday, we discussed as we ended our series that we need to practice the gifts that God has given us. That we need to put ourselves out there, that we need to give ourselves opportunities to refine them, to immerse ourselves in them, and to be uncomfortable at times as God uses us and uses our gifts through us and uses them for His glory and His purpose. So I thought that I should be the one that starts doing that. How does that sound? Okay, so if I'm going to challenge every single one of us to do it, I've got to be the first one. So I'm doing things a little bit differently starting this series to put myself out of my own comfort zone. First one is, as we start this series today, there's no end date in mind. I don't know when we're going to stop. And I know that sounds like no big deal, but for me, that's a big deal. My strength finders are futuristic and strategic. I love looking to the future. I love finding a way to get to the future. I love putting plans in place to get us there all the way along. And so right now through December, I have the scripture passage mapped out as to where we're going. But in the next 3 months, we've only made it to chapter 7. There's 24 chapters in Joshua. So I don't know when it's going to end. And you know what? That freaks me out. Why? Because I'm praying in this series, God, I want to see you do something. I want to see you work. I want to see you in the middle of this instead of it being a well laid out plan that I have thought of and prayed over and put together. I'm still going to do all of that, but I want to be surprised by God in the middle of it. Second thing that I'm doing to put myself outside my comfort zone is I'm no longer wearing dark pants and a blue shirt. I mean, I'm easing my way out of it. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, because you haven't been here before, the very first Sunday that I was here, I was told that the pastor dress code was dark pants and a blue shirt. Well, guess what? Today is exactly 18 months from when I first stepped on this stage. And I think that's long enough. I've worn dark pants and a blue shirt for 18 months. It's time for it to... So if you see, there's actually pink in this shirt. That's kind of edgy, right? Yeah, totally. But here's the weirdest part of all this. The most uncomfortable for me is I purposely chose khakis for today because I used to work for Target. And since I left Target, I think I've worn khakis like twice. So this is really putting myself out there. I'm not using a podium. For the last 18 months, I've stood behind a podium. I decided to put it aside. The podium is easy to get comfortable behind, and I thought, you know what, I got to put myself out there. I'm going to just be here vulnerable as God leads. And then the fourth thing that we're doing differently is Joshua is a tough book. It's a really hard book. In fact, it's probably the toughest book that we've been through together. And so over these next months, I'm really praying, God, do something crazy in this. And by crazy, I mean supernatural. I want to see God do something supernatural in the middle of what we're going to be talking about because we're going to be in the Old Testament for a while. In fact, most of 2018, we've been in the New Testament. So now we're going into the Old Testament. And many people say the Old Testament's no longer relevant for where we're at. And I would have to disagree. And I want to see God use it in a way that many of us sit here going, I don't fully understand what's happening right now, but God, you are using this in a way today in our modern culture that is hitting me right to the core and that God challenges us with the book of Joshua. I've been in it for a couple months now. It is challenging me, and there are many things that hopefully we'll see through this that God will continue to spur us on to use the gifts that He has given us as we put ourselves outside of our comfort zone as He comes after us and says, I have this for you right now where you're at. So with that said, I want you to open with me in Joshua chapter 1. We're going to start in the very first verse, Joshua chapter 1. And this morning, we're actually only going to do 4 verses. We're going to begin in Joshua chapter 1, and the book of Joshua starts with a pretty epic beginning, which I believe is the way that every good story should start, right? Every good story has a great beginning, because what does a good story do, or what does a good beginning do to a story? It sucks you in. It causes you to think. It makes you want to continue into the book. And that's what Joshua chapter 1 does. It begins like this. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. That's a pretty crazy beginning to a book. We start right away with a death. It sucks you in, right? Every great book does it. Every modern classic does the exact same thing. Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, written in 1859, begins this way. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. Dickens begins his story by sucking us in because you want to continue reading going, how can it be all of those things at the exact same time? George Orwell in 1984, his book 1984, begins this way. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. How does a clock strike 13? I must keep reading. Or Jane Austen in her novel Pride and Prejudice. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Is that really a universal truth? I had not known. Or J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit begins this way. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. I want to see that hole. And if you've ever watched the Hobbit movies or Lord of the Rings, you want to see where a hobbit lives. It sucks you in. Same thing with the book of Joshua. It sucks you in. Moses is dead. What do we do now? See, Moses being dead was a big deal. Moses is probably the greatest leader in Israelite history. And so at the beginning of Joshua, to say that he is dead, there's a good chance that this could have caused a lot of despair. That they were sitting there wondering, what are we going to do now? This leader who was chosen by God at birth, who was literally set aside, who was given his directions straight from God himself through a burning bush, who led his people out of Egypt, who took them on this long journey, who gave them freedom that they had never seen before. The greatest leader of all time is now dead. So what do we do with that? How do we respond to that? How do we react with that? Well, hopefully, as you read that for the very first time, as you put yourself in this story, as you understand what's about to happen in Joshua, that what the beginning of this story is an opportunity for you to get sucked into the story. That it grabs you, that it brings you in, and you sit there going, I have to continue reading what happens now. Moses is dead. So what happens now? Well, in order to know what happens now, we actually have to go back a little bit. Moses, like I said, is the greatest leader the Israelites have ever known. And there's an argument that he might have been the greatest leader the world has ever known. That God had commissioned him. He had spoken to him out of a burning bush. That he had been with him from childhood. That he had been saved. That he had been set apart. That Moses was special is something that every single one of us, as we read through the story of Moses, have to understand. Moses was special. There was nobody like him. And yet, as we read the story of Moses, we actually have to go back into that story to begin Joshua, because unless you're paying close attention, you may miss it. There happens to be another story in the story of Moses that's also being written. In fact, if you blink as you're reading through the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Old Testament before we get to Joshua, as you're reading, literally, if you blink at just the wrong time as you are reading through it, you may miss this story. For us, it's going to start in Exodus chapter 17. Turn with me to Exodus 17. The Bible starts in Genesis. Following book right after that is Exodus. Exodus chapter 17. The Israelites had been in captivity. Moses, this amazing leader, starts leading them out of captivity. They cross the Red Sea. They do all these incredible things, and now they're in the desert. And they've been attacked in the desert by the Amalekites. And there's a battle that many of us, if you have read the Bible, you understand this battle. You know this battle. There are many lessons within this. You've probably heard sermons taught on this battle. The focus of this battle is God's faithfulness and Moses' obedience and accountability and all sorts of other things within this battle. But as I said, if you blink, you may miss something in this passage that's quite notable. Read with me, Exodus 17, 8 through 16. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. Hear that story. You probably know that story. You've read that story. You've heard sermons on that story. But one of the things that I had not focused on in the middle of that story is there's this man, not named Moses, but named Joshua, right smack dab in the middle of it. So easy to focus on what's going on the mountain, that Moses is lifting his hands, that Moses is doing this, that Aaron and Hur are helping Moses. But what we don't see if we blink is that Joshua is right in the middle of what's going on. He's there in the valley with his people, which is important because why? Because God is writing another story in the middle of Moses' story. And that's the story of Joshua. God is doing the exact same thing with Joshua that he did with Moses. He has selected him. He's building him. He's getting him ready for the moment where he's going to usher him onto the stage that he's prepared for him so that he too can do something with the gifts that God has given him. As you read through the story of Moses, you continue to see this backstory of Joshua. If we jump forward to Exodus 24:13, there's another very important story that many of you have probably read. Again, there's this man named Moses, and he happens to go up this mountain, and he's with God on this mountain, and he gets these commandments from God on this mountain, and he spends a lot of time in this cloud on this mountain, and guess who's with him on the mountain? Exodus 24:13. Then Moses set out with Joshua his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. Moses was on the mountain for a really long time. In fact, so long that the individuals at the bottom of the mountain, the Israelites that were waiting for Moses to come back down, who literally was talking to God on the top of this mountain, they were so impatient that they built these idols. They said, Moses is gone, and even though he's literally hearing from God, like right up there, we can see the cloud. It's not good enough for us. He must have disappeared, so we're going to build these idols, and we're going to worship these golden idols instead of the one true living God. And so as they do this, guess what God has done? God has done the same thing with Joshua that he had done with Moses. As God had taken Moses and set him apart and put him in a place of protection so he would not get involved in the sins of the Israelites that caused them to be where they were, that he was giving him the ability to lead them to freedom. Guess what he's doing with Joshua? The exact same thing. Because where's Joshua while they're building the idols? He's not there. In fact, I'd read this story over and over and over again, and I had completely missed this part. God had put Joshua right up there on the mountain with Moses because God had a plan for him. Exodus 32, jump 8 chapters further, 17, when Moses finally comes back down, guess who's the first person to hear what's going on at the bottom of the mountain? Joshua. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There is the sound of war in the camp." He didn't realize it was the sound of celebration because of the idols. He was so naive and so focused on God that he's coming down probably going, there's absolutely no way that they could be celebrating and worshiping other gods because, God, you are the one true living God. And I've seen you. Why? Because I was on the mountain with Moses. Here's one of the cool things. They have no idea where Joshua was while he was on the mountain. There's just pure speculation that he probably stayed somewhere down below, that he was somewhere in the middle of the mountain. But they don't know if he actually went to the very top of the mountain with Moses, that he could have been there, seeing God right there at the same time that the commandments were given and the law was given, just the same way the greatest leader of all time had seen God face to face. I speculate that. I have no idea where he was. Nobody really does. But I say that because what we're seeing here is a story of God's plan coming to fruition in the middle of everything. And God using his people and taking his people and developing his people exactly for the moment that he needed them, to see the things that they needed to see, to be ready for the time that he had for them. It continues on. Not only was Joshua in the big moments with Moses, he was in the intimate moments where Moses got to see God face to face. There was a place called the Tent of Meeting. It was literally a tent that was set up where God would come down. And Moses would go in and he would talk to him. Well, guess who was there when Moses did that? Exodus 33:11. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one who speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Joshua was in the big moments, and he was in the little moments. He was right where he needed to be for God to show him what he needed to show him. He was there then in one of the key moments in Joshua's life. Israelites have come. Moses had led them to the end of the promised land, the edge. They could see it. They were literally right there. And now is the time for them to go in and scout out the land that God has given them, to take it, to fulfill the promise that God had given them, to go into the land that he had said, generations before, I will give this to you. And Joshua is one of the 12 that is chosen. In Numbers 13:8, it says, from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, son of Nun, was chosen. Well, Hoshea was Joshua's original name. From 13:16, we see this. These are the names of the men, all 12 of them had been listed, that Moses sent to explore the land. Moses gave Hoshea, son of Nun, the name Joshua. You see in this very particular moment, in a very big way, that God is continuing to set Joshua aside. See, individuals that God renames, you may want to pay attention to because there's a purpose behind it. Hoshea means that he has saved. And in this moment, there's a precursor to what's to come. As he's renamed Joshua, it means the Lord is salvation. That Joshua will become something great, that he has been renamed as a precursor of what's to come. As we get further into Joshua, we see that as the case, that Joshua will become something. But for now, he's this aide to Moses who's sitting here on the verge of something big. And what is that something big? They're about to go into the promised land. They're about to see it. 12 men are challenged to go and see the land that God has given them. And so they go in and they come back. And guess what? They're all super excited to go, aren't they? No, not so much. Not so much. Which I don't fully understand. Because I don't know about you, but my personal temperament is I'm one that if God says do it, you should probably do it, don't you think? These 12 men go in. 10 of them come back and say, you know what? I don't think we can make it. I don't think we can do it. The men in this land are giants. They are huge. There's no way we can overcome them. And yet there are 2 individuals, Caleb and Joshua, who come back and say, you're wrong. We can do it. And so they give a plea to the Israelites, and the 10 are heard, and the 2 are heard, and the 10 get everybody all stirred up, and they're like, we can't do it. It's impossible. And so there's mourning and weeping and gnashing of teeth, and it's a bad thing as they hear like, why did we even come here? And we see how this transpires in Numbers 14:6. As the 10 had spoken to the Israelites, this is the response. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, every single one of them that was there, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Man, what a charge. I don't know how you would have responded if you were standing there, but I can only picture Joshua, who's been given this vision of the land as he's gone in, coming back going, you do not understand. Yes, these are giants, but we will devour them. And yes, their protections are gone. Why? Because the Lord is with us. Come on, let's go. I'd be sitting there going, woo, come on. How did they respond? But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. That's not quite the response you'd expect. And all of a sudden it seems like God's plan is crumbling down. That this vision that he had, that this promise that he had given is all of a sudden being destroyed. As they're groaning, as they're crying, as they're saying, we no longer want Moses. We should have just died here in the wilderness. Let's find somebody to take us back. What is going on? It's chaos. Absolute chaos. And yet, what was God doing in the middle of it? He was putting Joshua right where he needed to be. Why? Because Joshua now had a vision that only one other person had. Moses didn't even have the vision that now Joshua had. See, Joshua had seen the promise. He had seen the land. He saw what it could be, and he came back, and he's challenging those around him, saying, do you not understand that this is where we could go? This is what the future looks like. You need to make this happen, and they all want to kill them by stoning them. How could this be possible? Well, it's possible because ultimately God had a plan. Behind the story of Moses is the story of this man named Joshua. And God is bringing his plan to fruition through all of this. And there were still lessons that the Israelites needed to learn. There were still things that needed to happen for them to get to the place where they were ready to go into the promised land. And Moses was no longer the leader that was prepared or ready to take them in. But there was a man who was, and his name was Joshua. So as we read the beginning of this story, what does it do? It sucks us in because it tells us Moses is dead. And it's easy to sit there going, oh no, Moses is dead. And yet, guess what? God was not. God was not dead, and neither was his plan. It was actually happening right the way it was supposed to, when it was supposed to, for his purposes, at his time. Why? So that he could receive the glory. So that he would be the one, as we read this story, as we see the story of Moses, as we see the story of Joshua, we sit there going, God, you are so good. Because in our finite mind, it'd be easy to sit there going, Moses is dead, it's over. It's bleak, there is no future. I think the story is relevant to us for a number of reasons that we can see right here in the very beginning of this passage. And what are those? There's 4 of them that I want to talk about this morning. First one is, God's plan will not be derailed. Why do I say it's relevant for us today? Because I think it'd be so easy to look around our world and go, God, what are you doing? We hear reports all the time from the 10, don't we? They're telling us that the land over here isn't as good as God said it was. Don't go that way anymore. Go this way now because we're never going to make it. As we see the leaders then that have been put in place, how easy it is for us to each of us go, I don't really want them. I want somebody else. Oh, no, by the way, this somebody else needs to live up to my expectations because here's what I think is best. And I think we should go back to Egypt. Do we want to go back to Egypt? No. We don't want to go back to Egypt. The Israelites did not want to go back to Egypt. And yet God was teaching them something they needed to know. And so why is this relevant for us? Because God's plan will not be derailed, but here's what I would want to understand. What is God teaching us right now? What is God teaching us right this very minute as we know that his plan is moving forward? What can we learn that we can apply to our lives to say, okay, God, I will trust you that you are doing something big. Because that's point number 2. God is always at work. God's plan will not be derailed, and God is always at work. He's always at work. Even in the chaos, God is using it for his purposes. I want to repeat that because I think that's very important for us to understand. Even in the chaos, God is using it for his purposes. I think one of the things that we need to do a better job of in our culture today is we need to step back from the moment that we're in to see the bigger picture at times, right? It's so easy for us to get caught up in what's going on here specifically in Woodbury or in our specific situation or maybe in Minnesota at large or maybe it's the United States. But when we step back and we see what God is doing, we can understand that God is always at work. It was a privilege today to have Prince Paul up here to share at the beginning of the service what God is doing in Ghana. What God is doing all over the world as his plan continues to come to fruition. He continues to move. He's always at work. But here's the thing, it's not always visible. Oftentimes it happens behind the scenes. As we read the story of Moses, or as you read the story of Moses, it's really easy to get caught up in Moses, but if you blink, you miss Joshua. What are we missing today? What are the things that God is doing right now in your life as he's pushing us forward as a church, as a nation, as a world, that he is working behind the scenes? Third thing then we can see is that God prepares his people with their gifts for just the right time. That God prepares his people with their gifts for just the right time. As God was working through Moses through all this, he was also working through Joshua. But there were times that seemed like the right time where God said, no, not yet. I have something else. You must be patient. You have to wait because my timing is perfect. How many people prefer their timing over God's timing? I'm for sure one of them. But here's one of the things that I have to understand. I never get this right. Ever. See, God's timing is so much better and bigger than my timing. And his time is always right. Even if that means that I have to wait. we must be willing to wait for God's timing. See, God has everything planned out to the exact minute. He knows where we're going to be tomorrow. He knows where we're going to be 30 seconds from now. He knows where we'll be months from now, and his timing is exactly what it needs to be. Because, see, I can't do anything with this. Given my own strength, I can't move this more than a minute. I can't make this minute, I can't make it 11:41 any faster than I'd like to make it 3:30 this afternoon, or 4 o'clock tomorrow, or next weekend. And yet God controls all of it. His timing is perfect, and that we must be willing to wait for his timing. Because see, I truly do, that God is still working today the very same way that he worked in the Old Testament. As he's working through Joshua, he works today with us. As he's challenging each and every one of us, as he pushes us forward, as he uses the gifts that we have been given, as he refines those, he is getting us prepared for such a time as this. So here's my challenge to you today. What is God preparing you for? What's the story he's writing in your life? What is he giving you now that you must use in your current context that someday he's going to push you forward into just the right time to do the thing that he has for you? Because here's the deal. Every single one of us still has that moment in our life. If you are not dead, you are not done. There are still things to do, and I can guarantee you that what God is putting you through right now is exactly what you're supposed to go through right now, because he's putting you someplace else in the future where he will use you right there too. And that he is refining the gifts that you need for that moment right now by putting you through the situations that you need to go through. Even if that means you're sitting there like Joshua going, do you not understand? Now is the time to go. Come on. How come you don't get it? And all the world is falling apart and they can't see it, but I've seen it. Well, guess what? Joshua was only one of 2 people that had seen it, and the others were not ready to go there just yet. Because God was still working in their lives to get them where they needed to be. So when the time came, they would sit there going, oh, that's right. God, it's your time. It's your plan for your glory, not mine. One of the things that I hope we see through this series, and I may be making some stretches as we go, but I think there's a lot of correlation to the book of Joshua and New Life Church today. There's some connections that I'm making that may not be true, but I'm going to make them anyways. Because you can't stop me. But I think there's some interesting nuances in the timing of Joshua and the timing of New Life Church. And one of those is the time frame. Israelites were in the desert for 40 years. So 40 years came to an end. It was time for a transition, time to move into a new territory, time for new leadership to step in that God had given a vision to say, here's where it is that we're going. I think it's a mistake that we're sitting just past that 40-year mark. Because here's what I truly believe God is telling us here at New Life Church is, guys, it's time to go. It's time to go. It's time to go into a place that you have never been before, because what God was doing with the Israelites is he was leading them into the promised land, this land that he had given them to say, this is yours. I believe he's doing that with the American church right now. Do you not see it, people? The land is there. It's right across the river. You've sent your people into it. You understand it. You've tasted it. Go, take it. You know, many of us want to be like the 10 as we come back going, I know I've seen it. I know I've tasted it. I've taken a grape. It was delicious. It was fantastic. There literally is milk and honey flowing from everywhere. And yeah, the giants are big, but guess what? God is on our side. And we're sitting here today on the edge of the promised land as God's going, hey, I've given you the land. You've seen it. You've tasted it. It's there. Time for the taking. And guess what we're saying? I'd rather go back to Egypt. Who wants to go back to Egypt? There's nothing in Egypt. I don't know, maybe there is. I've never seen the pyramids. They're kind of cool. But I'm saying it metaphorically because I truly believe that God is calling the American church, God is calling New Life Church to cross over because the time is now, the land is there. He has given it to us. Amen. And so there's one correlation. Second correlation, I don't think it's a mistake that shortly after the 40-year period, there was new leadership. Right now, we're experiencing that. On both sides of this building, within the academy and within the church, at the 40-year mark, new leadership stepped in to say, okay, what does that look like? And here I'm going to petition you guys. I need your prayer for that. What does the future look like? What is the land God has called us to? Because as we talk about helping people find new life in Christ here, near, and far, I really want to live that out. I don't just want to gather on Sunday mornings and do church. I want to be the church. I want to come here and I want to worship the living God and I want to celebrate. I want to do great things together right here. But then when we leave, I want us to go do even greater things out there. To be the church on fire for the Lord, saying, hey, we truly believe this, and we're going to do radical things. And God, we want to see you do supernatural things in our midst because we know right now it's your time. We may run into people and say, no, I don't want to do that. God, no, now's not the time. But I tell you this, we're going to read through Joshua. You want to know what you don't want to do? You don't want to go against God. The same God, the same living God that is in Joshua is the same living God that is right here, right now. Because see, we are a continuation of this story. This story doesn't end at the end of Joshua. This story continues on, and I'm excited to continue through this book because guess what? This story, as we follow it, continues all the way through our day today. So what was Joshua's first assignment as a leader? Was it to bury Moses? Was it to have a funeral? Was it to mourn? Actually, no. God's charge to Joshua is not wait, not mourn. Joshua, it's time to go. Verse 2. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River in the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. You see, what could have been something somber and devastating and destroying was something exciting because Joshua said, or God said to Joshua, Joshua, Moses, my servant, is dead. Guess what? Time to get up. Let's go. Whoo! Because that's what God's saying to every single one of us right now. Hey, guys, guess what? Time to get up. Let's go. I've given you the gifts. I've shown you the land. It's time to do something. I love John Calvin's reflection on this. He says this suggests, talking about this passage, the very useful reflection that while men are cut off by death and fail in the middle of their career, the faithfulness of God never fails. On the death of Moses, a sad change seemed impending. The people were left like a body with its head lopped off. While thus in danger of dispersion, not only did the truth of God prove itself to be immortal, but it was shown in the person of Joshua as in a bright mirror. Now, when God takes away those whom he has adorned with special gifts, he has others in readiness to supply their place. And that though he is pleased for a time to give excellent gifts to some, his mighty power is not tied down to them, but he is able, as often as seems to him good, to find fit successors, nay, to raise up from the very stones persons qualified to perform illustrious deeds. Here's my prayer today, that you understand that that's you. That God is doing that in your life. That the story of Moses, big and grand, was underwritten by the story of Joshua so God could get him where he needed to be right when he needed to be there with the gifts he developed in the moment so he could use them in the future. And guess what? He's doing that to you. He's doing that to us. He's doing that together with his church at large because he has given you the gifts you need to go where you're going tomorrow to take the land that God has given you to be an example for him. Why? Not for your sake, but that God will get the glory and the world will know that he is alive. Woo! I want to go do something. I don't know. God is alive. His story is being written today. We are a part of it as he put the pieces together, as he's putting the pieces together, as he controls every minute of every second. And he is looking at us saying, people, it's time to go. I don't want to be one of the 10 that said no. I want to be one of the 2 that said go. And when we go, I want to see God do supernatural things. Not that I will get the glory. Not that any of us will get the glory. But God will get the glory for the great things he has done. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you. Whoo! We thank you for who you are. That you are a God that has a plan, that you are